Before you shine your pitchforks and pick up oil for your torches, the short answer to the question posed in the title is yes. The long answer is yes, but this video isn't over yet, so I clearly have further thoughts on the subject. Romance in video games isn't a new concept, but it is an ever-evolving one. From its early presence in Japanese visual novels and adventure games, to Harvest Moon's newfangled marriage mechanic, to The Bachelor, The Rat Bachelor in recent years, relationship building in games has weathered the test of time. Even as the industry itself changes and warps to meet new demands, one unbreakable truth remains: human beings will get attached to damn near anything. I'm not being nasty, I'm with you here, I see you, sparkle on. If you clicked on a video about Stardew Valley romance, I'm gonna go ahead and assume you have a basic understanding of Stardew Valley and the knowledge that it does in fact have romance. The ability to court and marry whoever you'd like out of the 12 available candidates is a huge draw for many, and it certainly was for me. We've sat on the story of Pelican Town and its inhabitants for nearly a decade now. So, after all these years, how has Stardew's take on love held up? Come on, sit down, we'll have a nice little discussion about it. You can even yell at me if you want. Let's hop into it. Romance as a united genre has a few core elements, specifically in the case of movies or novels. It's hard to fit the concept of a good romance into one box, obviously, because the definition of good varies pretty heavily from person to person. That being said, most accomplished romance writers will point to 4 main pillars for a satisfying story. These are chemistry, commonality, tension, and reality. Chemistry is how characters interact with one another and the exchange of energy that comes with that. Does conversation flow naturally, or does it feel forced and exposition heavy? Is there a sense of intrigue or desire in how these people view one another? Chemistry itself can often stem from commonality. Commonality is obviously what your characters have in common, where they can meet in terms of personality, where their lives can theoretically fit together. Even in stories where it initially seems that person A and person B are incompatible, bonding usually begins when a surprise moment of agreement or similarity pokes through. If that's not there, barriers usually stay up. Enemies to lovers doesn't work unless you have a little bit of middle ground, otherwise they're just somebody watching TikToks on full volume without headphones in the airport. If you do that, you'll die in 7 days, I'm not even kidding. Tension can be a multitude of things, but in purely romantic stories, it tends to be a conflict between the leads or something preventing them from exploring a relationship. Tension can also come from outside factors, pressure on one or more parties. There's also tension, but I would argue that that falls more under chemistry. Reality binds all of these pieces together to make our characters relatable and make their chemistry believable. Reality doesn't necessarily imply a realistic setting, it's more important in terms of behavior. If a character has no flaws, they'll feel like a cardboard cutout, and it's very hard to get along with one of those unless you're a freak, but Amazon has everything in the ebook section. So that was a very brief overview of those concepts, but I don't want to keep you here for 4 hours and 23 ad breaks. This website is becoming hell. Every person is different, so building chemistry and commonality often falls to users' choices. You'll gravitate toward a candidate that you personally find interesting more often than not, which takes out a bit of the guesswork. But a game developer can't predict exactly who you are and how you'd feel. In Stardew's case, romance is also a side mechanic and not the entire point of the game. It's optional, which is good, not everyone wants it. However, that means that conflict and tension are a bit harder to weave in. Every story needs some kind of problem to solve, and at its heart, Stardew's is restoring the town, either through the community center or through Joja. The residents themselves aren't really personally involved in this issue all that much. They've all lived in Pelican Town for far longer than you, and have sat with the dilapidated community center for quite a while. They'll mention it occasionally, but they don't really tend to harp on it. This is your goal that benefits the community as a whole, not really one that the community is actively working towards. In this way, the entire Stardew population is a deadbeat father with a beer on the couch, but that's not important. For developers, it's also a massive time sink to write a conflict and resolve it in a detailed, satisfying way, as that takes a lot of dialogue and interaction to really bring home. In the case of Stardew, Eric Baroni is one singular person, so there's no writing team to handle the brunt of the romance. romance, it was just him. Stardew is a game that doesn't have a ton of space to pack its romances into, so we come to see a pretty harsh task form: write a convincing relationship over 6 or so short heart events, a line or 2 of dialogue a day, and environmental clues. That is a rough ask, and it requires a lot of strategic writing choices, but with the right characters, it is absolutely possible. Let's talk about those characters specifically through the lens of romancing them. With a solid chunk of our datables, personal growth is used as the main conflict. It's our boulder. If someone is childish, mean, or standoffish, they tend to put up walls with communication. Alex, Shane, Haley, and at times Sebastian are good examples of this path. In choosing to pursue them, you pick apart that wall by continuing to show interest and care and not shying away due to their initial behavior. The method that you do this through is gifting and speaking during heart events, which are actual actions that you do have to choose to take. I think this is really vital. By forcing you to take initiative, you need to be purposefully involved as a player to feel like a connection is built rather than pre-made for you. If a story plays out completely without your contribution, it separates you from the world entirely and places you as a viewer. Even though it's a very simple mechanic, it still provides player input, which I think is important. Personal growth here involves characters opening up or softening and eventually examining their behavior in some way, whether in front of you or not. Haley, my beloved, turns her inward attention outward and begins to be more cognizant of other people's feelings, including yours. Alex shares his past with you and allows the hypermasculine crust he wears to slip away rather than letting any real affection bounce off and fall into the dirt. Shane's alcoholism worsens, and both he and you are forced to confront it and dig down to find the source of his pain. Sebastian closes himself off in an effort to match how trapped he feels, and he's coaxed out of that enclosing doom by you. These stories all somewhat require your continued interest and guidance, although your actual stance is a lot of the time inconsequential in the long run. Some dialogue choices will lose you friendship points, but you can usually gain them back fairly easily. This causes a bit of dissonance between what you believe and what is reflected, but in all fairness, a lot of people aren't inclined to pick mean dialogue options for characters they genuinely do like, so most people don't run into this issue, but it can be noticeable depending on your playstyle. Other characters have conflicts stemming from the outside world, a good amount of them being familial. Abigail, Penny, Maru, Sam, and Sebastian again all deal with conflicts in their homes. Abigail's parents don't see eye to eye with her views, Penny reckons with her mother's behavior and again alcoholism, Maru tries to change the mind of overbearing parents, Sam has Kent and all the shit that comes with that, and Sebastian feels alienated from his family, both biological and blended. Some of these conflicts are resolved, and some are left very open-ended and not fully fixed, which I think is a fantastic choice and gives them points in realism. However, all of them have the dateable character turn to the player for some sort of comfort or joy, which is how that bond is deepened and how you fit into the issue. It can at times put you in a position where you feel like a bystander watching your aunt scream at a Target cashier. This can be good or bad. Sometimes it drums up empathy, which helps you connect, and other times it can feel othering in a way. I think the former is shown very well in Sam's 3-heart cutscene, where you can see him comforting Vincent in regards to his dad being overseas. It hinges on that family conflict, but it gives you both the chance to help Sam through it and see how he handles the situation. It brings out his personality and also makes you sympathetic towards him. It's remarkable that Shane's cutscenes deal with the topics of addiction and depression as well as they do too. You, of course, ultimately decide how you react, but his story doesn't sanitize the reality of the situation. With this type of game, Concerned Ape very easily could have chosen to dumb it down, but didn't. You see the raw pieces of the situation, but you also don't explicitly save him. He chooses to take steps forward himself. Sebastian and Maru are very much two products of one situation. However, Sebastian is given much more of a chance to process his feelings with the player, although still not that much time to do so. A lot of Maru's conflict resolution is done through her dad. This unfortunately gives Maru less time to shine on her own, which makes me sad because she's a great character and I love her. I'm Team Maru forever. I'll give my life for that woman. We still do get looks into her vast creativity and brightness though, and I love when characters are shown truly in their element. It's easier to connect with someone when you see them passionate. Abby's cutscenes strike a good balance between showing personality and her reactions to conflicts, but the audience feeling can be a bit noticeable in scenes with her parents, and I wish we saw a bit more personal evolution in her story. Not that there isn't any personal growth, but I do think there could be a little more. Penny's cutscenes are very interesting to me. On one hand, I think there's great variety with them. We see her facing her mother, working with Joss and Vincent, and getting into that situation with George, but I wish we got a bit more of a chance to build a sense of knowing her rather than just witnessing the world happening to her. Now, that could be said for plenty of Dateables, which waters down that point. However, I think Penny's case is one of the more severe examples. It's interesting though, because I can't quite put my finger on if that's what makes her story feel less involved to me personally. I'd love to hear what you think. She also has a lot of scenes where player input matters, which I love, but I wish it felt more like a dialogue between you, not a survey you fill out and get graded on. Haley's scenes have a great sense of progression where you can see her change through each step as she sheds the harsher, self-absorbed outer shell. I also like that the player gets to have input fairly often during her romance. I'm likely biased here because I've married her probably 12 times by now, but I think she has a strong set of scenes, which is good because her day-to-day dialogue can be almost cartoonish. It's very flat and one-dimensional compared to her heart events, and it kind of dulls down that sense of change a bit. Alex's cutscenes also follow this well-structured path of personal growth, with the added bonus that we get to see how he handles and heals from the grief of losing his mother. We see effort put in from both him and the player throughout his journey, making his change feel like a collaborative effort. He does kind of suffer from that cartoony dialogue though too, I'm sorry. Harvey, Leah, Emily, and Elliot have more varied central conflicts being a more loose term in general here. Emily's scenes, in my opinion, are the most personality-centric. More than anything, we see her enthuse and create. We get a window into what makes her happy and what she focuses on most. Romancing her is learning about her, and I think that fits really well with her character. I believe these personal moments are amazing, and I wish some other characters had more of them because it really humanizes the characters. But with the constraints of Stardew's systems, her scenes can leave you feeling like a watcher rather than a participant. If you're noticing a theme, yeah, this works more for some players than others. You might not notice it at all. In the case of Harvey, his through line is very much a classic relationship. There's a sense of tension and pining between you and him, but you still get moments that give insight into his hobbies and views. There are consistent mentions of trouble with his job, but his events skew more personality focused from the get-go. I do think that in terms of how the contents of his scenes are divided up, that he has the strongest ratio of personal to player focused mini plots. See, I can be logical even though I hate that fucker. I wish I didn't have to say it. Elliot does share a lot of that classic romance vibe with Harvey, but his story orbits his dream to be a writer. He also has a very well-portioned story. However, I do think he does lack some more defining moments as a character that help break him away from just being an artist looking for his muse. His strong personality can come off like a bit of a caricature if we don't have him interact with the real world. Leah's plot is a mixture of her navigating her art career and dealing with her ex-partner. Her line of heart events, to me, shines with its pacing. She has a very natural progression that feels real. I will say that I'm biased here since I rarely think a jealous ex subplot is done well and is almost always distracting, but it isn't horrible here, it's not that bad. Since this is a general romance mechanic dissection, I'm going to leave more in-depth cutscene discussions to other videos dedicated solely to each dateable character, which FIONA SANGSTER excels at, linked down below. However, good romances do rely on good characters, so it's important to at least wrangle some of that information for me. As I said before, the cutscene system does force a writer to use that time very wisely, which means it's nearly impossible to dive deep into a storyline through these short bursts of information. There's also the fact that romance elements are often not present in Stardew until the 8 heart mark, which means if you're looking for an actual dating experience, that's forced into 1 or 2 cutscenes before marriage, which can make the jump from friends to lovers feel rushed and a bit jarring. Stardew is a farming sim first and foremost, so I can only judge the romances themselves with the knowledge that there is only so much you can do here. But cutscenes aren't the only thing used to further your relationships. Daily dialogue also plays a big part. Each character only has a few lines per day, and it's pretty rare that the player is replying or furthering a conversation. You aren't having a back and forth necessarily, these pieces are more like quotes or blurbs. When writing dialogue like this, your goal is to give insight on the character without dumping exposition or sounding unnatural. You don't want these words to be useless, you don't want to waste this time, but you also don't want a Madame Web style script. All things considered, Stardew does a fair job at this. As time goes on and you get to know each character and see their cutscenes, the dialogue does reflect the individual's progression. You can see real changes in the way that they speak if you're following their personal journey. This is more evident with the loner types, but still somewhat noticeable with the others. A good portion of the writing is quite natural, or at least as natural as it can be in this context. The quotes are fairly topical and blunt at times, but that's extremely hard to avoid when you can't reply as a player. There's no way to further your conversation. However, the lack of chances to answer questions or respond in your own way can give the feeling that you're a mannequin of sorts. You could be anyone and nothing would change. But when you're working with a very simple romance system, that's like trying to cook beef Wellington in an easy bake oven. It's not made for that, you're cooking with a light bulb. If we're continuing with the easy bake oven metaphor for some reason, we're still left with a good tasting little brownie that's pretty spectacular for being made with a light bulb. It's nice, it serves its purpose, and with the correct expectations, you're very happy with it. I will say the daily quotes do have somewhat of an issue with repetition. Almost everyone has cases where the same line is slightly rephrased and used again. General repetition is inevitable since you can't just generate infinite lines forever, but with such limited resources, it does feel like those reused lines are taking up precious space. Like I said earlier, player preferences are crucial in drumming up chemistry, which helps to fill in some of the writing gaps. If you like a character, you like them, and your imagination plays a big role in the story. You are the defining factor in building these relationships, which makes it much harder to categorize these as good or bad. But if you're not putting in the brain work, the romances certainly have more of a chance to fall flat. If we go back to those pillars of romance I mentioned in the beginning, we can see commonality as one big factor here too. If you share common ground with a character or relate to them in some way, that can often be just as important as a good story. That's what most romance games bank on, you choosing a character that you particularly connect with so that the romance feels more tailored to you. The number one criticism I do genuinely feel is the post-marriage dialogue and personality shift. Monotony and repetition in interactions with a spouse after marriage is far more noticeable here, and in some cases we see character regression, most notably with Shane instantaneously going back to the way he was before with his drinking. Now, recovery is not a straight path, but with this example, it feels less like a falling off the wagon incident and more of an actual oversight. Generally, though, almost every character becomes noticeably two-dimensional after marriage, and it definitely hinders the realism in some cases. But, you know, by that time in the game, you're a certified grinder. You're Scrooge McDuck, my man, this is the least of your concerns. Or maybe you've realized that money can't buy happiness and you hate your cardboard wife, but she's all you have. There's also a very apparent lack of diversity, which is both just generally not appealing and also gives the characters less of a relatability factor to real-life players. It's also just not a hard thing to incorporate. More characters of color would have given more players a chance to see themselves represented. Hopefully, we'll see effort put into that area in Haunted Chocolatier. All in all, I did spoil this video at the beginning. Yes, Stardew Valley's romance is pretty good for the purpose it's meant to serve. Stardew Valley is not a dating sim, it's a farming sim with a dating mechanic. Comparing it to full-on dating-focused visual novels or AAA games with a big focus on romance would be comparing apples and oranges. They serve different purposes. However, when we do hold Stardew up to those core romance tenets, and even to games made by far bigger studios, the project can hold its own. Eric seems to very much understand what relationship storylines attempt to accomplish, and he uses his resources well. Elements of it can get a bit muddled, but I don't think that's surprising or even necessarily bad. The criticism I did have is applicable in a more analytical context, but if you zoom out and see the romances as a piece of one big puzzle, those criticisms are very small. It's interesting to dive deep, and I like to do that because it's fun for me, but at the end of the day when I zoom back out, they're really pretty good. Context is everything. That is all I have for you today though. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I appreciate you. Thank you to all of my members, and I will see you next time with something else. Stay safe, stay wonderful my friends, and goodbye.